Hey guys, what's going on? This is Pantside Dragon, and today we'll be doing the top 10 best junglers for solo queue for patch 5.6. And there are several reasons why this tier list is going to be a bit different from the other tier list. First off, I did hit Challenger tier, so my opinions have changed greatly from being in Masters. And second off, the video was more rushed as I didn't do enough research before doing a tier list on the jungle. So I do feel like some champions were left out and I didn't include them in that tier list. But now I've got a pretty good glimpse on what's good and what's not, and I feel like other Master and Challenger tier junglers will agree with me on this one, as my other tier list was pretty biased to be honest. And with all that being said, let's get started. Alright, so at number 10 is going to be Sion. So Sion's Q did get nerfed in this patch as it does reduce damage in the jungle now, which means he does have a tiny bit slower clears, but he does scale with health, and when he does come out of the jungle he feels really tanky still, and he still does have a lot of CC in his kit, so yeah, he's going to be doing a lot of work in those team fights. And of course having a really strong base damage, that's a plus too. He's also got a decent initiation, but the reason I say it's decent is because it can be easily juked, and he's also really tanky because of his W, scaling with health, giving him a shield that's up pretty often if you do have a lot of cooldown reduction, and does a lot of damage if you pop it. Some cons are that he does have a slow start, he cannot really gank that well since he doesn't have, you know, like a good gap closer. Of course, once he is level 6, he can make those ganks happen, usually on the bot lane or even top lane since they are long lanes. But even then, the enemy will back off if they hear that noise coming from his ultimate, so it's kind of hard to make things happen, but of course he is a great counter ganker. And what makes him really good, honestly, is his kit. The amount of CC he can output while being really tanky is what makes a great champion right now. Of course, I do feel like he is still better in the top lane, but he also can work in the jungle too. Next up at number 9, we do have Udyr. Alright, so Udyr, the reason I feel like he's really strong is because of the combination with Cinderhulk and Phoenix stance, giving him a lot of AoE damage, so he's really tanky because he has his turtle stance and a bunch of resists. And so when he does go into those team fights and the enemy cannot peel him off, he's going to do a lot of damage just by standing near them. He also has really good clears with Phoenix stance, just clearing away the jungle, and he's pretty good in small fights as he will be doing a lot of damage. But he does have his cons. First of all, he's kited easily, so if he's trying to run into the enemy, he will just get poked down by whatever spells the enemy has. And in the early game, he doesn't have the best ganks since he doesn't have a good gap closer. All he has is his passive and bear stance, so it's kind of hard for him to pressure early game. But if both teams do come out even in the mid game, then he's obviously going to be a huge threat to the enemy team, because Phoenix and Cinderhulk will definitely burn you, and even more if you have Thornmail and ground buff, so you're going to be doing a lot of damage. Next up at number 8 is going to be Lee Sin. So you're probably wondering, why do I always put him back in the tier list, and you know, sometimes I give him out and put him in honorable mentions. I don't know, sometimes I feel like he's good, and then sometimes I just feel like he's falling off, and then he reappears back in my games, and I'm just like, okay, I'm confused. But obviously when you climb the ranks, you will have consistent Lee Sin players who are actually good at the champion and play him pretty often and snowball the early game. So again, his early game is really strong. He can snowball and pressure a lot of lanes early, but if he doesn't do anything and he doesn't start snowballing, other junglers do outscale him. So I recommend you only playing him if you're a really good Lee Sin player. If you're not, then just ignore him and play someone else. In my case, I can play him, but I'm not good enough to play him at my level. Next up at number 7 is going to be Vi. Again, still strong and early game jungler and can lock down people with her ultimate. If there's one thing I will point out about Vi with this tanky meta going on right now, is that her W does do % health damage, so that might be pretty good against tanks. Of course, most of the time she will be going onto those squishies to kind of lock them down, but afterwards, killing those squishies, she now has to handle the tanks, and what way better to do than with maximum % health damage. Like, her base damage is still strong, she can definitely kill a lot of people, and if you are like 0 and 3 on her, there is always the option of going Cinderhulk on her since she does kind of scale with health with her passive. Of course, her AD ratios are too good to give up on, so that's why you go Warrior. If you aren't behind, of course. At number 6 is going to be Nunu. Hey, I know what you're thinking, he's more of a competitive pick than a solo queue pick as he's not that useful for carrying the games. But with the Cinderhulk item, how could I leave him out, because before he used to only have good single target clears with his Q, but now he has AoE coming from Cinderhulk. And honestly, if you want to do damage, you want to use skirmishers. That thing is really good for Nunu because he can stick onto people with his Ice Blast, so it's not a problem for him to get some auto attacks in. I actually do highly recommend getting skirmishers on Nunu just so he can do some damage in teamfights. He can also counter jungle easy with his Q being single target and taking out the big camp, although it's not as useful as it was in Season 4 because they increased experience on the smaller camps. And honestly, the only reason I actually pick him in solo queue is because when I don't feel like trying and I'm really lazy, I just pick him because he's not really that hard to play. And this kit is pretty consistent, so there's no skill shots, there's no unique mechanics I have to do with him. All I have to really do is eat stuff, ward up the enemy jungle, throw some snowballs in lanes if I feel like going to them, and relying on my team to carry my ass. Because honestly, in teamfights, you're just throwing snowballs and pressing W on your AD carry. At number 5 is going to be Nidalee, most times banned, and I can see why. Really annoying to deal with. And when she does get ahead, it just feels like there's no way to coming back, and it's just annoying to play with since she can just kill you by landing a spear or even chunking you. And so a really good Nidalee player will definitely show that she's really strong in the right hands. I have a low opinion of her because my Nidalee sucks ass, let's be honest here, but other people do shit on me, are really good at her, and I've seen it. And that is why people ban her, because if there's a Nidalee player on the enemy team and he's really good, well, you're not going to have a good time. But honestly, even if the Nidalee player is really good at her and she's trying to poke your team down, it's not going to work against really good players since they have really good reactions and can kind of sidestep those spears. So it's really easy to juke if you aren't being CC'd at the time and you have vision of Nidalee. And of course, she is incredibly snowball reliant as she doesn't have any utility, except for heals, so if she does bad in the early game, it's going to be hard for her to kind of come back. And if she is facing a bunch of tanks, well, those spears are going to do really low damage to those tanks since they do have magic resist and a big amount of health. But to finish it off, if you are a really good Nidalee player, she's probably going to be your number 1. Next at number 4 is going to be Zac, and ooh, this guy, I talked a little bit of shit about him in my patch 5.5 rundown, saying he wasn't good enough and deserved a little bit more buffs, until I actually played him. Now first off, his clears are decent since you do have that infinite sustain and you don't really have to pot until you're going to gank. The Cinderhulk definitely buffed him a lot as he does scale with health really good with his passive, and once you get a few items on him, he's incredibly hard to kill, and like he is just this super tank who never dies in teamfights. His initiation is also really good because it does knock up enemies for 1 second instead of 0.5 seconds, which means you can use your Q before you use your ultimate now since the enemy will be locked down for 0.5 seconds more. And also if you use your E and you land behind the enemy, you get a little mini insect by using your ultimate as the knockback range is really high. Now there is only one problem I find with them often, is that if you do miss the E, you feel really underwhelming and you don't feel like you do a lot in team fights or even ganks, because what you lose is 280 base damage and a 1 second knockup. And he does have pretty long cooldowns beside his W, so you kind of feel like you're only using your W in team fights for a bit until your E and Q come up. And in my opinion, he is a really strong jungler right now. You do feel very strong and unkillable, so he does make a really good front line. Next up at number 3 we have Gragas. Holy shit, this guy's actually really good. So he's a tank jungler, but he's also really good at being an early game jungler, and that's why he's here at number 3. He provides a lot of CC, so it's easy for him to gank. He has a gap closer with his E, which does also knock up, and his damage to take down enemies is pretty good. He does scale with health on his passive, so the more health he builds, the more regen he will get, and his base damage is pretty good. Also with the damage reduction coming from his W, he's going to be really tanky and hard to take down. And his W does come up pretty often too, might I add. But basically, what you're looking at is he's a tank jungler who is an early game jungler at the same time because he can gank, without waiting to be level 6 like most other tank junglers. And when he does hit level 6, his ganks do become really good. I do feel like some other junglers do outscale him in the late game, but he still does scale better than Lee Sin and all these warrior AD jungles, just because of the Cinderhulk. Next up at number 2 is going to be Sejuani. So she did take a little nerf to her W, not scaling as well as she did before with health, but you know, still scales with health. And her ultimate did get a little slight nerf, so if she whiffs it, it's kinda hard for her to go in teamfights as it's a 30% slow instead of a 90%. But since these are just small nerfs, it doesn't hurt her a lot, so she's still going to be in the top 3. She's a level 6 jungler, so she's best at level 6, but even then, she can gank lanes since she does have a gap closer with her Q and her slow with her E and of course W, damaging the enemies constantly. Of course there's Cinderhulk helping every tank jungler. There are things about her that make her stand out more than other junglers. First off, Liandry is really strong on her. She has an ultimate which lasts for 1.5 seconds in teamfights, and then she can follow that up with E for lasting about 1.5 seconds, so you're going to be getting double damage for about 3 seconds off your Liandry's. The reason I feel she does outclass other junglers is because how she scales with health. it doesn't make her more tankier, but makes her do more damage. So that is awesome for the mid game and a bit of the late game, or basically, she's a tank jungler that does a shit ton of damage. And at number 1 is going to be Rek'Sai. So even if Sejuani wasn't nerfed and was in her patch 5.5 mode, I feel like Rek'Sai would still be better than her regardless of my last tier list. It's just that I was kinda hyped for all these tank junglers coming in, and I just totally disregarded Rek'Sai for a while, and I just hopped on the Sejuani hype train and just abused her for a while. But now thinking about it, Rek'Sai versus Sejuani for number 1, I do feel like Rek'Sai is better than her, only just by slightly a bit. They both have their different strengths and weaknesses. Like for one, Rek'Sai is definitely better at the early game, and she snowballs the game incredibly hard because of her mobility with her tunnels and her ultimate, so she can dominate the map easily, while Sejuani is more of a mid and late game champion or a level 6 jungler. I do feel Sejuani does scale a bit better since she has a lot of CC and good lockdown with her ultimate, but Rek'Sai also scales well because she does have pretty good peel with her W, she's pretty tanky with her passive, and her E will always do a lot of damage since it does scale with AD, not bonus AD but just flat AD. So since Rek'Sai has a good early game, mid game, and late game, versus level 6 early game Sejuani, and then a pretty good scaling into mid game and late game, I feel like she is better in that way because I do emphasize the early game a lot. Of course, if both teams do go even, usually the tank jungler is more powerful than the warrior enchantment jungle, but Rek'Sai doesn't fall that far behind tank junglers because her numbers are strong. So now we'll be doing some honorable mentions, and Rengar is definitely a pick that is annoying to deal with because he just one-shots your AD carries, but he's incredibly snowball reliant. Nautilus is more of a support pick than a jungler at the moment, but he is pretty good at jungling in my opinion still. And next up, I do like Skarner. I feel like he's in a good position right now, especially with Righteous Glory to get those initiations, but I feel like the enemy can kite him before he gets the initiation, or he needs Flash to, get that Dragon Pole. Alright, so the only thing that's good about Fizz is he can 1v1 everyone with Skirmisher Saber and his ultimate, which does make him a pretty good early game jungler, and his ultimate is often up. But in teamfights, he's just crap unless he's fed. Next up is Pantheon. So I do prefer kinda more AD Pantheon and then going into tank after, but I feel like he needs a certain team comp to go full AD or half AD and half tank, since most likely top lane and mid lane will be going damage. So I feel like if top lane is a tank, he's going to be really good as he's a better fallout than an initiator. And there's Shaco, but of course I don't understand how he works, and I do hate Shaco mains a lot. All I know is that if he dies early, he's really useless, but if he gets ahead early, he's really annoying. Hey guys, so thank you guys for watching this tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys did enjoy this tier list, leave a comment below for some reason. Hey guys, so thank you guys for watching this tier list. Leave a comment below. Check out those tier lists right up there. There's mid lanes right there. It's pretty recently updated. Fast 4.5 as you can see. Wait, 5.6, and then there's supports. Just add in Nautilus as like maybe number 2 or number 3 or number 4, I'm not sure which one it is. And then there's top laners, patch 5.5. Pretty recent, not as recent as this one or mid lane, but it's relatively the same. Anyways, I think I'm Panzer Dragon, and I'll see you guys next time.
I didn't know how to be. No crib on MTV. God only knows.